Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us for the Dyspraxia in Education panel. I've got some wonderful panelists with us today who are going to discuss their experiences in education. You'll also have the opportunity to ask questions, so please do use the chat boxes. We will be able to see your questions. If you are watching through Instagram, the panelists won't be able to see your questions. I will be able to, but if you are able to move over to our YouTube stream, then they will be able to see your questions as well. Now, I'm going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. So, Bheki, would you like to go first?
Yes, I will. Hello, everyone. My name is Bheki Masondo. I'm from South Africa. I hold a master's degree in inclusive education. I believe I'm a strong advocate of inclusive education, and I'm currently doing my PhD in educational psychology, focusing on reading difficulties faced by learners in South Africa. Yes, that's all about me.
Hi, I'm Danielle Cawser. I've done over 10 years of special educational needs TA assistance. I've got a PGCSE in primary education, and I currently make resources for schools.
And hi, my name is Sue Granger. So I'm dyspraxic myself, and I have dyspraxic children too. So I live the world a bit. And professionally, I work in schools as an advisor, and I primarily advise on autism. But we obviously encounter an awful lot of neurodiversity beyond that. And I've worked in this area for sort of 10, 20 years now, so for a fairly long time.
Hi, I'm Kat. I'm dyspraxic. I've worked in early years and SEN for about 6 or 7 years, and I've recently graduated from a degree called Educating with Autism and Disability and SEN. So, yeah, I'm a big advocate for accessibility and dyspraxia awareness.
Hello everyone, I'm Grace. I've been in early years since 2017 on a voluntary basis. I have just graduated with an undergraduate degree in early childhood studies, and I am I'm a PGC early years student, so I am a trainee teacher as well as being dyspraxic myself.
Amazing. Thank you so much for introducing yourselves. So, for anyone watching who's not familiar, my name is Crystal Bella. I am the founder of Dyspraxia magazine. Dyspraxia magazine isn't my day job. I work in children's services as well as SEN schools. I work in marketing, so slightly less hands-on with the young people, but I do interact with them and kind of assist with some things here and there. So we have a really wide variety of people on this panel today, and I'm very grateful for you joining us. I think this is a very important topic, and from the conversations we've had so far, we're also very passionate about assisting young people and making sure that they have the tools that they need to succeed. We've put together some topics for us to discuss. So I'll start straight away with this one here. So in terms of identifying dyspraxia within education, how can we as people within education increase early awareness and diagnosis, and why is that important?
Well, from my opinion, is that the early identifying of situations makes it early intervention, so then children can progress. It's natural for a child with dyspraxia to be developmentally delayed on many areas, so getting that intervention early helps decrease that delay.
And I think it's twofold as well. I completely agree with that. And I think also it's about young people's self-esteem, because I think even from a very, very young age, children become aware, oh, hey, I'm struggling with PE more than my friends. I can't do my buttons up yet. I can't, my handwriting looks very different to everyone else's. And without any sort of explanation or support for that, your self-esteem can be chipped away really, really early age. So it's protecting the young person too, if that it can be identified early.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I myself did a research project about dyspraxic children in education, and it was mostly conducted on adults and reflecting back on their experiences of education. And it was really common that a lot of people that took part in this study said that they were diagnosed later in life, and they often spoke about like their experiences with teachers and their experiences with friends and things like that, and how much they felt that if they had been identified earlier as being dyspraxic, it would have solved a lot of issues for them in terms of like mental health and self-esteem, and like probably like their grades and things as well, because they would have had that early support. And speaking for myself as well, I know that because I didn't get diagnosed until I was 18 at university, I often reflect back on my time at high school and think, oh, well, I could have done a lot better if I'd had that support that I like should have had if I'd been diagnosed earlier.
Oh, I also think that early diagnosis or early awareness are crucial, because early intervention can greatly improve motor skills or self-esteem of someone who is diagnosed with dyspraxia, and also that might increase early academic success.
I was diagnosed with dyspraxia when I was around 9, and because my teachers weren't really aware of how much it actually affected my education, they never actually considered it as a factor for any of my developmental skills. So I ended up my GCSEs, my lowest score was in PE, because the awareness wasn't there.
It's all about improving teachers and other professionals' awareness of dyspraxia, because some of the signs can look very much like a child who isn't putting in a lot of effort. So I know certainly one of my sons would say, he was often got a lot of negative comments from teachers because he wasn't trying hard enough with his handwriting. He was careless. He will say now, to this day, he still doesn't have his pen license, and he's now at university.
I've had that exact experience.
And it really impacts you, because when people are telling you you're not trying, what do? Do you stop trying?
Yeah,
Maybe, so it's really important that the teachers get that awareness, so they know what they're looking for, so they can sort of start raising those questions, and diagnosis then becomes possible.
Because you start to believe those things, those labels that you hear. And I hear often a lot like, oh, why are we so, determined to put a label on everything? And there's that negative attachment to labels, like it's this big scary thing that's going to hold people back. But I would rather, growing up, have had the label of you are dyspraxic, you are autistic, rather than you're slow, you're lazy, you're stupid, you're not going to amount to anything. Like, for a child to hear that, that's a lot, even just on the self-esteem things, even if we exclude the extra support, even just on a mental health perspective, that's humongous. But having that support can really set people up to do well and be their best selves.
It does, yeah. I think that there should be more training around like neurodiversity awareness just among like teachers and in education in general. Because I think like obviously the awareness of like autism and ADHD and other neurodiversities like that has grown so much in recent years, which is an amazing thing, and like I'm really glad that has happened. But I just don't really understand why that's lacking still so much in dyspraxia, and why that hasn't grown with autism and ADHD, because it's so common as well. Like it's just as common.
Yeah, and I think that brings us on to our next topic here, of comorbidities. And where there are so many other neurodivergent conditions that have so much more time in the limelight, shall we say, that we hear about them more in the news, in movies and things like that. Dyspraxia is being lost under those other conditions. Is that due to a lack of awareness? But also, what are those other comorbidities that we see?
I think
Well, I think that dyspraxia is often overshadowed by other conditions such as ADHD, autism, or learning disabilities, in which in some sense, they share common symptoms. But the lack of awareness and an understanding of what dyspraxia is mean that it can go undiagnosed. Maybe a learner might be what might have ADHD, or what autism. We also having what a dyspraxia, and that if maybe a teacher or a person who diagnosed that learner has no understanding of what dyspraxia can go un, uh, undiagnosed in that particular person or learner.
But I was just going to say that dyspraxia and autism now are all part of one big family of neurodivergent conditions. So usually, when you have the one, it means that you have the one of the others, or your increased likelihood. And it was quite interesting when I was looking into this about how they overlap. So things like ADHD has a issue with being organised and sticking to routine. Well, not exactly routines, but having organisation in your schedule and that. And dyspraxia also has an issue with that. Same with sensitivity from autism, and then it all overlaps. And then because of, as we've already said about the one's got more awareness, people will automatically say, "Oh, yeah, you're not organised. Oh, you must be ADHD." Not looking at the other symptoms that would lead more to dyspraxia.
Yeah, that's really true. And I think that what's often not talked about is the social and emotional side of dyspraxia that is more commonly associated with autism, but is very still much prevalent in dyspraxia. So yeah, that's another like big crossover that just isn't spoken about enough, because I think people, because there is such a crossover, I think it's like 80% of autistic people are dyspraxic or something like that.
Yeah.
People just think, oh well, you're both, but in fact dyspraxia does have a lot of common traits as autism, and it's not necessarily always like they have both conditions. If that makes sense.
I feel like, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, Corinne.
I feel like as well with dyspraxia, there's not enough like publicity. Like for instance, this week is Dyspraxia Week. There's not enough awareness of promoting the week than there is ADHD, autistic.
Yeah. I was saying this the other day about how it's ADHD month, but then it's Dyspraxia week, or dyslexia week this week. And I'm like, why does that get a whole month? Like, yes, it should get a month in a sense it's important, but why aren't these other conditions getting a month to learn about them themselves?
And it never ceases to amaze me. And I go into schools a lot. It's what I do for my day job. When I mention dyspraxia, a lot of teachers will say, I don't even know what that is. I've never heard of that. And they say that with interest. It's not like I'm not interested. It's like I should know about that, and I don't know anything about it. And those that are aware of the term will usually say, oh yeah, well we support handwriting. Like, no, it's a great deal wider than handwriting, and often handwriting is not, certainly for me and my family, it's never been, my handwriting is shocking, but that's never been the biggest issue. And unless we understand a person's identity in terms of their neurodivergence, it's hard to support them effectively. Whether that's autism, whether it's autism and dyspraxia, it's dyspraxia and ADHD, we need to understand all those parts of a person's identity to really understand them. And I think as an individual, we need to know that about ourselves too, to understand
Absolutely.
ourselves.
And where the comorbidities, like as we were saying a moment ago, there's an 80% comorbidity with dyspraxia. There's 50% with ADHD as well as dyslexia. So the chances of having just one neurodivergent condition is quite slim. But with that, where dyspraxia isn't very well known, quite often people see their traits, their ADHD traits and their autism traits, and they're experiencing, physical coordination issues. And instead of going, oh, I wonder if this is a separate condition, they're saying that, oh, that's ADHD, that's autism, whereas actually they're not. And I see a lot with advocacy work, especially on social media, for example. There's loads of amazing people creating awareness videos and content, and I find it really frustrating when people are like, yeah, lack of coordination and spatial awareness, that's autism or that's ADHD. And sometimes those conditions can explain those things. So with autism, you are likely to experience issues with spatial awareness and stuff as a result of being overwhelmed by senses. but if you were to take that part away, then you wouldn't have it. And with ADHD, you may find spatial awareness issues, bumping into things because you're distracted by other stuff, and you're running at 100 miles an hour, got 10 million things to do. But if you weren't to have those things, then that wouldn't be an issue. But when you have those consistently all the time, that's when it's not those other conditions and it is dyspraxia. And I think sometimes we like to merge things a little bit, and things get lost in translation. I think it's very important to go back to the core sometimes, because there are secondary traits that I like to call them, like what we were saying with dyspraxia and the emotional side of things, the social side of things. Sometimes that could be mistaken as autism, but that can be a secondary trait in terms of self-esteem, mental health as a secondary issue there. So yes, there are blurred lines sometimes, and there are absolutely crossovers, but sometimes we have to go right back to the core and simplify it down a bit, because otherwise we risk people missing a diagnosis and missing support. Not that there's a huge amount of support, but we can work on that, and I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about understanding as much as it is about support. It's about people realizing that actually I might have worked really hard, but my writing does not look neat. I might have tried really hard, but I have forgotten everything today in my day in school. And it's just people understanding that as much as anything else. Sometimes it's not about the strategies. It's just about, can you just get it when these things happen, and show a little empathy would be really important.
Yeah, and patience.
Yeah.
But I think the overlapping symptoms can make it difficult to diagnose dyslexia unless a specialist or a teacher is specially trained to recognize dyspraxia.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's like subtle signs for dyspraxia as well, not just like the big things. It could just be simple in being in the classroom with how they hold a pen, how they use scissors, how they sit on a chair because of having a little center of gravity. They usually sit on the edge of the chair with their feet on the floor. And that's why a lot of, all the teachers say, tuck your chair in. Why are you sitting like that for? And it's because they feel off balance when they're sitting on the back of the chair. And again, that's, people think, oh, they're being rude, or they're not listening to instructions. They're being, difficult. But no, they're just trying to be comfortable and feel safe.
Yeah.
I think that leads us really well onto our next topic here, which is around terminology and why language is so important. Because as you were just saying, sometimes we're hearing things like, why are you doing that? You're not paying attention, being a troublemaker, purposely doing things. And, as I think we mentioned earlier, like a young person hearing those things, whether they're in primary school, they're in secondary education, college or university, that's a lot to hear. It's a lot to process.
And it's not, my worry is when seeing a lot of young people who hear these, and you were just saying earlier about labels, and the really difficult labels are not the dyspraxia label, the autism labels. It's those labels of lazy, doesn't try hard enough. I can think of many worse names or labels than that have been addressed. And I think young people internalize that, and you can't always see it, I think, as a professional, but children internalize that, and it comes from their core beliefs about themselves. So that by the time that they actually reach anywhere near adulthood, they firmly believe, that's me. I'm lazy. I'm messy. I'm untidy. I'm clumsy. And trying to unpick and remove that label at a later date, that's a big old job, and it takes years, and it shouldn't be that way.
It does. I had the lazy comment multiple times in all of my parent teacher evenings and things like that, just saying that I wasn't trying hard enough, and I definitely internalized that. I thought, well, I can't do this and I can't do that because I don't try hard enough, and no matter how hard I try, it will never be as good as they want it to be, like the teachers and things like that. But I think that the difference from not knowing that I was dyspraxic and not knowing what dyspraxia was to when I knew what dyspraxia was and I knew that I was dyspraxic, that I could put all of these negative things that have been said to me onto this is why, and I could then go to university and be like, okay, I'm dyspraxic, this is what I need to help me get a good grade, and then getting a really good grade because I was helped just makes like such a difference. And I think just like it's a big part of identity. It's a huge part of my identity of being dyspraxic. And I think that when I was younger and I saw other people talking about dyspraxia, saying that they were dyspraxic, and knowing what it was would have just made such a difference to like my self-esteem when I was younger. So I just think like the terminology and people using the term dyspraxia and talking about their dyspraxia is just it can be a huge life changer for younger people in education.
I'd love to know everyone's perspective. Something that I've spoken about a lot recently with friends and family, within my work as well, is how that terminology differs between the different genders of young people. So one thing that springs to mind is an advert that was replayed to me recently, an Always advert, where people of all different ages and genders are asked to perform an action. And they're asked the question, show me how a girl runs, show me how a girl throws. And it's that very exaggerated, overly like not great at it and like running quite poorly. And all the genders are doing it the same. And then when they get to the younger children who are kind of around 5, 6 years old, they're asking them the same questions and they're putting like real effort into it, how they would really do it. And it was a campaign around, the challenges that young women and girls face, that we've been conditioned by society to think that being a girl means you're weak and uncoordinated. And it makes me realize that, there are so many young girls that aren't diagnosed under the age of 16, 18. And I did a peer research study a few years ago. 84% of adults who are women weren't diagnosed until after the age of 18, compared to men who were the majority diagnosed when they were younger. But also how that affects young boys who are experiencing coordination issues, the expectation on boys to be perfectly coordinated, really good at sport, and then being called things like a girl, because that apparently is a very negative thing to be a girl, because then you can't do things. And then the bullying that they receive for that is extremely high. And then the girls, for example, who are having those coordination issues, it's, well, they're a girl, so we expect them not to be coordinated. And I don't know about you, but when I was younger and I was expected to do coordinated tasks, quite often when I said I can't do them, it was, well, I can't do that because I'm a girl. And the impact that has on both boys and girls, because our society worldwide has conditioned us that boys have to be extremely coordinated, very athletic, and girls almost aren't allowed to be.
I think it's very acceptable if you're a girl and you are uncoordinated, you aren't so good at sports. It's accepted. You're not so likely to be bullied. Whereas as a boy, with your
Terrible.
peers, you are immediately going to be targeted if you are not great on the football pitch, if you can't catch a ball. So in that sense, I think it can potentially be harder for boys. But then I think girls will go under the radar, and that's another threat for girls, because girls tend to be a bit quieter. They're struggling, they internalize it more. So actually, the fact that they may be struggling with certain things doesn't become so obvious, so they maybe don't get the support. Whereas so often, I mean, this is stereotyping a little bit, but boys, maybe because they're struggling more with the bullying, maybe externalize it a little bit more, and then teachers and professionals start realizing, oh, this young person is struggling. So maybe they're more likely to get the diagnosis. But on both sides, there's difficulties, maybe different difficulties, but without doubt, difficulties all the same. And it all comes back to the impact that has on self-esteem for both genders, I think.
Yeah.
And of course,
Absolutely.
if you're non-binary, it's like you're still expected to fit into a category, even though what you might be expressing to others is, I don't fit into those categories. People are putting you into them, and that's really, really troublesome.
Absolutely. So moving on to our next topic is around transitioning. So how are students impacted when they change schools? So thinking about going from early years into primary school, into secondary school, and then moving into higher education like college, university, or straight into work. How are students impacted by those changes, and how can we within the education industry support them and give them the tools that they need to make that transition as smooth as possible for them? What could that look like?
One of the things that was mentioned earlier about the spatial awareness, that's going to be a key thing when you're in a new environment. So having the person like be able to experience the new environment before a lesson or before they're forced to be there, or having at least some photos of reference so then they can sort of visualize where everything is. So that would help the transition, and it was also reduce the anxiety of being in a new place and accidentally tripping over something because you're not aware of there's a carpet on the floor or some wires or whatever it is.
Yes, I think also the move can heighten the feeling of anxiety and decrease their confidence. I think the schools in which maybe the learners are transitioning to or changing to need to continue with their educational support, and also maybe uh, offer a continuity in specialization services like the occupational therapy, which will also prevent the gaps in the progress of the learners.
And
I had I had a map when I was in secondary school, and that's what I used to find my way to class all the time too, because otherwise I was getting lost.
yeah, and it's understanding that it's not as simple as people think, and I think that's again why the diagnosis is important. So for me, I mean, I'm in schools all the time. I can't find my way around any of them, and quite often I'll be shown around once. I might even be given a map. That's not always going to, unfortunately, going to help me, and I will still get lost, and I will still walk into a cupboard and think that that's the corridor. And I'm an adult now, and I can deal with it because I'm used to being in that situation. But I think when you're a young person transitioning, you're given a map, you have it explained once, and people think, well, that's enough. For some of us, it's not. And we're going to repeatedly have that problem. And it's not that we're not trying. And again, if you're going up to secondary, you know you're on show. Your peers are kind of, that's the unfortunate thing about being that age. They're going to pick up if you're having those sorts of problems. So it's really worrying. It's that ongoing support. It's people understanding. If you struggle with spatial awareness and finding your way about, or you struggle with remembering what to pack in your bag and remembering your PE kit on a Tuesday, that problem is not as straightforward as you just need a list. I just need to explain it to you once. It's likely to be more ongoing, and you might need to try a few different strategies. I'm often been given lists before, and lists are great with me, except that I will forget to look at them. So it's like then I need a reminder to look at the list, and it's really important that I think that there's that depth of understanding in schools, so that they recognise it's not always simple and straightforward to find that support. And when a young person's transitioning between schools, their anxiety is higher. They might be struggling more than they did in their previous setting, and adolescence might be hitting, which ramps everything up.
Yeah, hormones definitely add to the mix of things that are somewhat overwhelming. I remember one of the things I struggled a lot with at school outside of like social issues was transitioning between lessons. Going from, right, I've just put all of my energy into, coordinating myself, taking notes, reading off of the board, because we know people with dyspraxia struggle with tracking visually, from the board to what they're writing, trying to write, everything's been wiped off the board before you've even had a chance to finish the first 3 words. And then, okay, now I also have to pack my bag, get myself dressed, put my coat on, put gloves on if it's cold, navigate my way to my next lesson, find my seat, unpack everything again. And that, for other students who might not be experiencing those issues, they might not even think about the struggles that would do. But as a dyspraxic student, that's like so much to think about. And I think the energy that you lose on that as well. I remember I would come home and I would be absolutely drained.
It's really exhausting. And then I was just thinking, then when you arrive at the lesson, sometimes it's to find you on a lab stool, which can be really hard to perch on. And you can't afford to fall off that lab stool, because you're going to get told off. B, you're going to have a lot of laughter. And sometimes, maybe you feel embarrassed, and maybe that'll impact your well-being. Or maybe you'll decide to be the school clown, and you'll come it up that way. But you're right. I think all of these things are exhausting, and it really impacts on your energy to be able to do well academically, but also, it's about self-esteem yet again. It's you start feeling low, you start feeling, I can't cope with this, what if I forget everything today, what if I forget my homework again tomorrow, and then your anxiety just ramps right up.
I feel like as well that key point of contact in certain settings, whether it be the key person in the early years, classroom teacher in primary or secondary, I feel like that as well, transitioning from say primary to secondary and having that key point of call come with you to the new setting, who already knows you and can help you put in different strategies to navigate and like your new school life.
And it's not just that, like sometimes when you are doing an event or you're doing a project and you move the classroom around and everything goes into a new place, and it's like, and then they're saying, oh, just go and find the scissors, go and find the paper. And you're like, where have you moved it to? Because it's not in the place where you left it. And it's just like, just having that respect to just say, by the way, this has been moved here now. Have a look around the room, get your bearings.
I think also, I don't know if anybody else experienced this, but when I was in high school, I would get punished a lot and get a lot of detentions for being late, which was something like, as a dyspraxic person, being on time for things and being organised enough to get there on time is real difficult. So to then be punished for something that you literally can't help is really hard. So I think a bit more leniency on policies like that, like behaviour punishments on things like being late or doing certain things that you physically can't help, should definitely be loosened a bit.
Amazing. That leads into our next topic, which is around attitudes. And I think this topic especially holds a lot of weight, I think, for dyspraxic students. So how are students affected by the attitudes of teaching professionals? And this is something I see a lot within our community, with our young people who are still in education, that they find that their teachers don't really understand them very well. They're hearing from their teachers about them being lazy and things like that, like we mentioned earlier, around language. How do those attitudes of people that they should be looking up to and should be supporting them, how does that affect them when it doesn't reflect what we're being told we should get in terms of support?
I feel like for me, one teacher actually comes in mind. It was my secondary school PE teacher, and she would always be saying, "Oh, you're not trying enough. You're just not good at this certain sport. You're lazy. You're stupid." But there was obviously a reason why I was falling behind in them certain sports, and I feel like having that negative attitude as a teacher can really impact a student's self-esteem.
I remember being in a PE class in secondary school, and I think we had a supply teacher, and I think our teacher was on maternity leave, and we was learning volleyball, and for the life of me, I could not coordinate punching the ball, doing the right technique. So in the end, I just ended up punching it, and that's how I worked. And then the teacher didn't see that I punched it. She goes, "Well done, you finally got it." It was so patronising. And then when she caught on that I was actually punching it, she told me, "Oh, you're not doing it right." I'm like, "This is the only way I can do it, because I can't physically do the way you're asking me to do it."
I think also students with dyspraxia are sensitive to the attitudes of their teachers. Negative attitudes such as maybe impatience or misunderstanding can lead to low self-esteem, increased anxiety, and sense of inadequacy. I think also teachers who show understanding, patience, and support can significantly boost their confidence and motivations for learners with dyspraxia to participate in class.
Yeah, having that one teacher, even just one, I think someone else mentioned it earlier, having that key person that you can go to, whether that be your tutor or quite often English teachers. It always seems to be the English teachers. I don't know if that's just my own personal experience and my friends, but quite often the English teachers, not to be biased on other teachers, tend to have that kind of space where you can go to them and just offload and have that supportive person. If you can find that person within your school or education institution where you're at, can make such a huge difference, because even just one person that can really influence a young person and give them the confidence that they need to be able to succeed and be them better selves.
And there are a lot of neurodivergent teachers out there, and some that aspiring to be here, and that can be incredibly powerful. And I think being a neurodivergent teacher is challenging at the moment for lots and lots of reasons. But a number of times I've been in class and heard teachers say, "Yeah, I'm dyspraxic or I'm dyslexic. I struggle with this too." That's so powerful, because it's saying, "Yeah, I struggle with it, but you know what? I've succeeded here." And also being able to give those positive messages and say, yeah, I really struggle with spelling, or I really struggle with staying organized. I'm a great problem solver though. And it's such a powerful message, when teachers are able to give that message.
Yeah, I've done that, and then sometimes it's sort of like, this is the strategy I use to get around the thing that I'm struggling with.
Yeah, it gives that different level of empathy that I think students really need when they're young. Just somebody to understand them in a way that not many other people around them really would, unless they had other neurodivergent people around them. But on the attitudes of teaching staff, though, there was a study in 2022 that was conducted where parents discussed the levels of support and understanding from their teaching staff for their diagnosed dyspraxic children. And it was found that most parents felt that their children weren't being understood and weren't being supported by the teachers in school and the Senko and things like that, which I think is a really, it's a sad finding to hear, that it's still the same, that teachers are not understanding, they're not trying to support but I do think that just comes down to a lack of awareness and a lack of training in it.
Yeah. Yes, I think which makes me to speak about the professional development on dyspraxia for educators. I think it is key to fostering positive attitudes and also ensuring that students receive the encouragement and the accommodations that they need.
And that all stems around education within education, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Do enough people know what dyspraxia is? And I think we can all confidently say no. As Sue was saying, quite often you can mention dyspraxia to teaching professionals and they genuinely don't know what it is, not from a lack of not wanting to know. You don't know what you don't know, and then we risk things like we mentioned earlier, where the information we get isn't always accurate and up to date. Quite often, people are citing outdated research and using processes that are long in the past. Something that was brought up earlier was the pen license. I see that get mentioned within our community Facebook groups all the time, and how much people hate them. It's a lot of things, isn't it?
I also think the entire gap in researching dyspraxia compared to other neurodiversities, the gap is enormous. There is not that much research into dyspraxia and how people that are dyspraxic feel about education and things in their everyday life. And if there was just more research into it, like there is other neurodiversities, I do think that awareness would pick up and it would be a totally different story.
Yeah, I was working with a child before who wanted a pen license, but they would not be getting the pen license. There's no way. So what I did was I was there one-to-one, so I got some of those erasable pens, the friction pens, and I said, this is your special pen, this is what you can use. so they could, when they worked with me, I allowed them to use this special pen, so they felt like they had that recognition and that sort of pen license. But even if they made a mistake, they could still rub it out as if it was a pencil, and the joy it gave them, and every other child in the class wanted it themselves, so I was spending a bit of money there.
That's true inclusivity, that it's instead of a child missing out on that opportunity, that pride of, yes, I can finally use a pen, which is such a wild concept as an adult. And like you said, other students say they would like to use, a pen that does that as well. A lot of the time, the reasonable adjustments and changes that we can make don't just help, those students, those neurodivergent and disabled students. They can impact and support everyone. So when we see people who don't want to do those things, because quite often you hear, well, they'll have an advantage above everyone else, whereas we know it actually levels out the playing field. It's kind of like, well, why not? How does that really impact other people when you're putting someone else at a disadvantage specifically because you don't want the others who already have an advantage at a disadvantage? Because by giving someone else support, it doesn't take support away from the others.
Yeah.
It's people want equality rather than equity, and I think that's the key word difference in it.
Yeah.
Is that equity is making it fair for everyone, but people think that that's what equality is, when it doesn't. Equality is the pen thing of like, oh well, you've got this and you've got to work towards this, but equity is, like you said, giving the pen to somebody who will not get to the same level as the other kids, and that's okay, and that should be fine. It makes no difference to anybody else's life but the child.
No, and it gives them such a boost in their confidence that they would try to do better. Because if you keep saying to a child that you can't do this, then they're never going to achieve art. Well, some may say, I want to prove you wrong, but that's very, very few and far between that happens.
Yeah.
Majority of them will lose all their confidence in their own ability and end up going down.
Yeah.
And again, I think we're measuring by a neurotypical standard. It's saying you're a good student if you can write to this level. Actually, that's just one skill. And you might find that your dyspraxic students are much better in another skill. Maybe it is about the problems that solve, maybe it is about the creativity, but that's not measured. So actually, you're not a successful student, because what's being measured is your handwriting. And the other area I think really needs to be understood better in education is different learning behaviors, different good learning behaviors. So for many neurotypical people, yes, it means sitting still, fully back in your chair, tucked in nicely with your pen. And that's a great learning behavior. But actually for neurodivergent pupils, learning behaviors look really different. You might be sat very differently. You might not be using a pen. I don't think that matters. You might be fiddling at the same time. You might be looking down, because that eye tracking is really tricky for you, and you learn much better if you're looking down.
Yeah.
And that's good learning behaviors. But too often in schools, and again, it's just lack of awareness. It's good learning behaviors means you use a pen, you use it neatly, you sit like this, you don't fiddle, and you look up. And that's not great learning behaviors for a dyspraxic pupil, I don't think.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's just education as a whole should just be more accessible and inclusive, and should just be less strict on those types of things. Like, if it was, then maybe neurodivergent kids would just have an easier time. And like, there's so many neurodivergent kids that are undiagnosed as well when they're younger, that if education was just more inclusive and accessible, then I just think they'd come out of it feeling totally different. Like, if that makes sense, I don't know.
I also think that many educators, not educators only, but school staff, lack the full understanding of what dyspraxia is. Also, this lack of understanding can hinder the implementation of effective support strategies to learners that are diagnosed with dyspraxia.
Yeah, I think an issue comes with not just with the education to understand it is the funding within schools and the times that they have to do it, because they have like their weekly inset, but that's usually to cover their topics, occasionally training, but overall they have very little time to learn about dyspraxia and any other neurological condition. And that it's every year more and more children are getting diagnosed and coming into schools with these needs, and the teachers aren't prepared.
And that's when we see a lot of teachers leaving education because of burnout. It's, most educators desperately want the best for their students, but they can only give the best if they can give their best selves as well. And if they're not, armed with all the right information, the education, the knowledge, and trying to support a young person, it's difficult seeing someone struggle, or knowing that they're doing it quietly as well, because they've learned that if they raise their voice, they're going to be told that they're lazy and they're not trying hard enough, and so they keep quiet. That on a teacher side, that's really difficult to witness. So as you said, that funding there, that time, it's almost like, you need more funding, we need more teachers, more educators, more support workers to really be able to support everyone.
But it's actually, I think it's one of those cases where it's spending to save a lot of the time, because although it, relatively speaking, it's a relatively, and I do use that word carefully, but it's a relatively small amount of money to put in that support early on. But it's when a child really crashes and burns, and I've seen that so often, when they experience burnout, or when they leave education, or they need special supervisions because they just can't stay regulated, anymore. They can't cope, or their mental health crashes. That's way more expensive, and we don't want children, young people, to reach that stage. It's a little bit of, relatively speaking, again, a little bit of money earlier on saves a lot of distress, and again, money later on, I think.
Yeah, that's where we work on a reactive model instead of a preventative support, informed model.
And that comes back to the point of why the first question of why early intervention is so important as well.
Absolutely. I'm going to move us on to our final topic. I will allow a little bit of a trigger warning. It's our least favourite subject in schools. I might be biased when I say this, but we are going to talk about physical education. Okay. Which I know triggers a lot of us, so I thought I'd kind of give us all that pre-warning before we jump in. So on that topic, I have seen a lot of people mentioning it within the comments across our platforms. Please do share your stories with us, because it's so great when we see and hear other people talk about experiences that we experience ourselves. So please do take advantage of that while you've got us all here. So physical education, what issues do students currently face, and how can we support them?
Getting changed, shoelaces, not falling over when you're changing your socks,
tights, buttons.
That's before you've even started the lesson, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's why some schools now just say, right, if it's PE day, just come in your PE uniform. Don't bother getting changed. But from my experience, sometimes it's like some PE teachers, they're the only teacher in the lesson. So it's 30 plus kids, and they're having to get them all to do the exact same action at the same level at the same time. And then if you've got somebody who's dyspraxic, who's very behind, that's when they'll be like, well, why aren't you getting this? The rest of the class are getting it. And then sometimes as well, you don't have time to actually break down the movements. So I was in a year 3 lesson, and they was doing overarm throws, and some of the kids weren't getting it. So I said, why can't we do the, was it 3 o'clock, 12 o'clock, or 9 o'clock, or reverse that? But they said that they wasn't allowed to learn that until year 6. But why? That's a technique that helps you coordinate your body, because they're already learning their time, a clock around that time. Why not use that same hand movement to understand how to throw a ball?
That's so wild to me.
Yeah.
The thought of no, you're not allowed to throw in that particular way until you've aged at a certain. I can't think of like the logic. I'm sure there's a reason, but I can't logically pinpoint what that would be. That's so yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just again being anti-inclusive, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
we're going to make this 10 times harder for you.
Yeah.
I think the time limit on getting changed was probably the worst bit for me. Of like, here you have 2.9 seconds and you need to be changed, otherwise you're in trouble.
Especially on swimming days.
Mhm.
Yes, that was worse.
I feel like COVID sort of delayed. Well, it did delay, but I feel like COVID has had a really big impact on children's physical development, even in the early years. Even like I'm based in early years, and most of the kids that I have now were COVID babies. So you can see the big impact in going from year 1, year 2, and then down to reception, where COVID did have an impact on them. And I feel like they need to have that extra opportunity to practice the skills that they should have had during the COVID lockdowns, but obviously didn't because we were indoors.
Mm. I think going back to what we were saying about issues with clothes, I think that sometimes gets overlooked. Just on Monday, first day of Dyspraxia Awareness Week, I go to work rushing because I'm late. I forgot that I had to be in the office that day. And I'm sat in a workshop and it's warm, and I go to take my jumper off and realise that when I put my t-shirt on that morning, it was both inside out and back to front. Classic, very on brand for me.
Yeah.
But these are things that we sometimes forget about. I think someone mentioned buttons earlier, and the impact that has on us socially, both as children and adults. If you see someone whose their buttons aren't done up in the right order and they look kind of unkept, there's that judgment on them, but also on like the family as well, and that just impact that they have. And especially when we also look into like speech disturbances with dyspraxia, if someone's struggling with their speech as well as their physical appearance because their t-shirt's not tucked in properly and their buttons are done wrong, the impact that has. And then you're going into a lesson, you're late, everyone else is already on the tennis court, and you've got to choose a racket, and the weight of a racket is quite heavy as well, thinking about joint stability and cats. That has a really big impact, and that dread as well.
I also
Realizing it's PE
Sorry.
day.
Yeah, I also think that I don't know if anybody else had this, but I used to get quite a lot of like pain from PE as well, from like the effort, the like triple effort that you have to put in to do the tasks that everybody else can do so easily. Like I would be in pain after because I've tried so hard and I've hurt my muscles from trying so hard, or my wrists are sore from having to hold things in specific ways.
Yeah, I've got hypermobility as well, so I sprain my joints very easily. And a number of times I've come out of PE with some sort of sprained muscle, and then I'm expected to go on for the rest of the day.
And I think there's lots of those sensory issues come up again for it within PE, and again, that's not always seen part of dyspraxia. It's often seen more in relation to autism or maybe ADHD. But there's all the noise, there's all the smell, there's the vertigo of having to stand on something that's really quite low, but to you, with your wobbliness, feels really, really quite high. And all of that is it has a real impact, and you're trying to deal with all that as well as walk in a straight line, not fall over, and deal with the fact that you've probably done your shoes up not in a straightforward way, and it's really challenging. And again, it all takes energy out of you. And if you're then going to maths afterwards, can you focus on maths, or are you just sitting there trying to recover?
And I remember my PE lessons were on the opposite side of the school from the maths lessons. So I did actually have that. I had to get changed, get my bag, make sure I've got everything, and rush across the school in that short time limit you're allowed to transition between lessons. And honestly, it was exhausting that you couldn't actually. You struggle to learn in the next lesson because you're spending half your time recovering from PE and that transition.
I think support-wise, it just it comes back to awareness again. I think teachers just need more awareness of dyspraxia and of different abilities in general. I think if PE teachers had more awareness of the different abilities, then they could kind of plan that the class will be based around those different abilities, and like, oh, well, you're better at these kinds of things, so you could do this at this level, and you're better at these kinds of things, so you can do this at this level. And I just think that it would make it much more less of a dread if you knew that just that your needs were being considered by your PE teacher.
It's inclusivity as well. You know, if there's, you know, young boys who, you know, the rest of their classmates are doing particular sports, and, you know, you got to pick people, and then being that last person who's picked, and you can just see that dread in their face of, oh, I've got to pick you to my team. And then the girls kind of, you know, with the, you know, issues around all sorts of other things with like grooming and stuff, you know, that high expectation of, you know, to look a certain way. But also people being missed out from team sports because they're not good enough, instead of helping them find a sport that actually they really enjoy. Doesn't matter if you're good at it.
Yeah,
That's the other thing as well, is like, in order to do sports, well, you have to be good to do sports, otherwise what's the point? So, well, there are many reasons.
And there's different ways of being good too. I mean, I was one of those ones in PE that I was so enthusiastic because I loved it. I was just dreadful. And I was a safety hazard, but I loved it. But that enthusiasm is not something that gets you a high grade. It's only the very, you know, lovely coordination skills, the high level of skills, which gets you the sort of recognition. And it's so important to learn a sport as well that you love. For all young people, because that's what you take on through life. And if all you ever learn in school is sports that involve a lot of coordination, well, dyspraxic people aren't going to find that sport that they love.
Yeah, it's very limited to what sports you do actually learn in PA, because I did extracurricular PA after school because they said, oh, we're going to do skiing, we're going to do archery. And I was pretty good at doing them because they were big movements that I could actually plan, you know, like it's archery, so it's smile, pull, right? So, but you couldn't do that in school. So I was never graded on that. So I was always graded on the high coordination things like football, handball, netball. It's just all the ball sports. And it's like, even running, like I can't run anymore. I've got, but even then, it's just like loads of people with dyspraxia have issues with running because of the quick coordination with your feet. So again, you're always graded on the things that are difficult to us.
Yeah, somebody in the comments mentioned avoiding exercise for a long time as an adult, and I think that's a huge thing to note, because I think all of the different ways that you can be humiliated through PE class, it does really make you not want to do any exercise or do any sports or put yourself out there for any hobbies or anything that is active like that, because you just think about all these times in PE when you couldn't do something and everybody laughed or your teacher said something, and it's like it's a wheel, it's a cycle.
I think also schools can adapt PE programs to include more individualized activities, also non-competitive options, and also a more motor skills training.
I feel like as well, if the other subjects can be adapted to meet a student's needs, then why can't PE be adapted in the same way?
Often it's about the learning the skill that's important, because the instructions don't, for me anyway, they don't necessarily help me. It's no good saying put your arm here, your legs there, and I'm lost really, really quickly, and I'm using the different arm to you. And maybe I just need it explained in a different way, because once it's a bit like what you're saying, Danielle, about archery. Once you've learned the actual motions that you need, sometimes that's okay, that's what you need, but it's the actual learning of them that's hard. And maybe it's about the different teaching skills.
Yeah, I was gonna just say, I remember being in the skiing lesson once, and they used to say slide the feet in front of each other. So sliding is pretty an easy technique, isn't it? So, but then I had a different instructor today, and he said step with the ski in front. I was like, how do you step with these? So I ended up stepping, and I fell down the ski ramp thing. So, and then the guy said, all right, do it as you said. So I did the slide. He goes, well, that's what I told you to do. I was like, no, you didn't. You said step, not slide. And again, that was a bit of the terminology that made me think the action was completely different that he wanted.
You raise a very valid point there about instructions and how we interpret those. So we're coming to the end of our session. It's now 6 o'clock. Thank you so much for everyone tuning in. Now is your opportunity. If you wanted to ask any questions, do pop them in the chat. If you are watching via Instagram, please do move over to YouTube to ask your questions, just because we don't see the questions directly. I do have a way of looking at them, but our panelists can't see them. But I will take a look at a second in those. So I'm just going to go through because there have been some questions that have been asked further up. This is testing me now to see if I can find them because there's so many. We love an interactive session. Here's one question from Charis. How would you go about ensuring educational institutes understand dyspraxia? So I think we did briefly touch on this, but would anyone like to add to this question a bit more?
I think there's one important thing to add. I mean, we were talking about the resources in schools and the lack of time in schools. So it's it's not just a question of, well, we need more training because we have to fit that training in. But I think if we could deliver more training and understanding in neurodivergence and include dyspraxia alongside the different neurodivergences, that would be a really helpful way to go. So that schools are just understanding all of your pupils are neurodiverse. You've got neurodiverse, and you have a lot of neurodivergent pupils, and dyspraxia is one of those things. That would be really, really helpful because I think teachers want to know.
Yeah.
I try and make PowerPoints about different conditions, like neurodivergent ones, and having like something that breaks down dyspraxia, about what it is, having the things that help identify it, something that a teacher can, when they have time, to just go and refer to, so that they can always have it on hand, just as like a reminder of the key aspects. Because a lot of the time they go to a training and then they don't get anything to back up that training. It's just meant to stay in their head, and it's usually a lot of information that a neurotypical person can't retain, so let alone a neurodivergent person.
And it's hard because for that support for schools, because at the moment, for example, in my local authority, if you're an autistic pupil, we've got an autism team, and I go out and I deliver that training, I deliver that support, and it's free to access for schools. But that's for autism. There is nothing for dyspraxia. There's actually nothing for ADHD either. And that needs to be a service that schools can access, because where do they go to for support? And they haven't got all those money in their accounts to be paying for all these individual trainers. So I think it needs a really sort of structured, strategic approach. How do we skill up our schools to be more neurodivergent aware and supportive? And I think it needs a lot of thought.
I think it just needs to come more from the Department for Education and the government. They need to put more importance on early intervention and give, like, through that, making more time for teachers to look through, to do training and maybe have these like easily accessible booklets or leaflets maybe, or something like that, saying these are things that you should look out for, like, because it is a school's responsibility to look out for those as well as parents. Like, we should all be looking out for those traits as educators and young children, so that they can get that early support.
Moving on to our next question. Kingdom of Alphalus 2. It's a great username. How can we get more support in note-heavy lessons? They used to hurt the hands due to time and pressure. Very relatable.
I use... Oh, go on. Sorry.
No, you go first.
I actually use a lot of assistive technology. So I have a software that I can record. Say, for instance, at uni, I can record a lecture and I can also take notes at the same time. So I have the audio as well as my handwritten notes as well.
I was very similar at university. I had a dictaphone that I was given, not because I was dyspraxic, because I was dyslexic. So, so I had a dictaphone, so I would record the lectures, and I would also be given permission to have access to the PowerPoint before the lectures. So everybody could download it, but they would open it early for me, so I could see it before the lesson, so I could make early notes or use that as reference and write on it.
I think as a point of general accessibility, lessons and any like visual that is given in a lesson should be provided before the lesson so that people can look at it ahead of time. Because obviously, well, I have a processing delay, and I think it's quite a big percentage of dyspraxic people do have a processing delay. So in the lesson, they might not even have a chance to process this information. So just a general rule of accessibility of making these lessons accessible ahead of time so that people can just look at them, process them in their own time, and come to the lessons and be able to listen thoroughly, and therefore enables them more time to actually make notes is a huge thing. But yeah, I also had a dictaphone at uni and it was quite helpful.
We need those visuals as well for all those things that are on the whiteboards, especially in schools, because eye tracking can be so hard. And it can be really painful just trying to find your place and then look down, make your note, look up again and find your place. That's really hard. And we shouldn't be put at an unfair disadvantage.
Some schools are allowed to use additional tech. So my younger brothers, for example, in their school, they're allowed to take an iPad with them for some lessons. And sometimes the classroom has iPads, so that whilst the PowerPoint slides are on the board, for example, they can also have it in front of them on their iPad, and they can go backwards and forwards at their own time space. That is a huge game changer when they told me that, because to them that's totally normal, whereas to me I was like, wow, that's amazing. That's very inclusive. But also there's other things such as speech to text software, and it's something I see people use a lot in my adult life as well. One of my doctors uses it to write up his reports. I use it at work. There are lots of people who use stuff like that now. It's become a lot more common, because I know sometimes people feel quite self-conscious about using assistive tools for things like that. But yeah, there's quite a few options.
I was just
Sorry.
sorry. I was just going to say quickly about with dyslexia, and I assume with dyspraxia as well. There's a thing called Irene syndrome, which is visual stress, meaning anything on a white background is very hard to read. So most whiteboards are completely white with a black pen. That causes headaches and blurred vision and makes it extremely hard to make notes. So when you're expecting a pupil to copy loads of notes and have it in neat handwriting, it's virtually impossible. So for those sort of stuff, I think I was with a school before where they allowed the pupil to take a picture on the classroom iPad of the notes so that they could copy it down later. Others just have printouts of the key notes from. This was in a primary school, so they had the key notes from the lesson so the child could follow along.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who has responded in the comments and interacted with us today. And thank you very much to my panel members for talking about this very important subject. You all spoke beautifully and very passionate about this, and it gives me a lot of hope for the future of dyspraxia awareness. Thank you so much for your input. To everyone watching, thank you again for joining us, and we'll all say goodbye now. So thank you. Bye.